You are listening to an MLGA Network podcast. Dude, I can't believe we got Mike Maharrey on the show.
Do you think he'll be mad if I call him Dirty Maharrey?
Phil, why would you give our first big guest a stupid nickname?
Do you think he'll get mad if I call him Santa?
Phil, cut it out.
What about Wayne Gretzky? No, that won't do. Okay, I've got it. Maharrey Tubman.
I have a crazy idea. I'm going to call him Mike. That's his name, and I don't think you're close enough to him where you get to give him crazy nicknames yet. In fact, I think you, Phil, you should call him Mr. Maharrey.
Well, Tubbs of Fun, you don't speak for him. And you know what? We have a real shot of walking out of this being new best friends and internet famous.
Hello, I'm here. You know, I can hear you.
Damn it, Phil.
Wayne Gretzky, really? I'm a goalie. That's
My
so
bad.
lame.
I'm embarrassed.
Let's pick a hockey player. We only know one. So we'll say Wayne Gretzky.
That is exactly what happened.
That's the only person I know.
Welcome to Make Liberty Great Again, the best damn Liberty podcast that you've never heard of. Phil and I will be your guides as we peer into the ridiculous reality of our society and our government. Let's get to it. Thank you for tuning in today to Make Liberty Great Again, definitely not Santa edition. I'm your host, Cam Harless, and with me, as always, is my lovely co-host, Phil Padilla.
And boy, do we have a special episode for you all today. This is our third interview episode, and we're very, very excited about it.
Because it isn't Ryan Burgett.
Exactly. Hi, Mike. Sorry again about all the silliness. Cam put me up to it, so just blame him.
So the Santa thing, that really did annoy you. You know, I had the big beard. Well, not really that big a beard, but it was kind of big. I was like going toward the big beard, and then people started calling me Santa Claus. I was like, no, this ain't happening. I shaved that crap off. There was a couple of people called me Lysander Spooner. That was kind of cool. I kind of liked that vibe, but most people it was Santa, and I was like, no, I'm not going to. And then I don't know if y'all know Avens. She took a picture of me over at the Libertarian Convention thing in New Orleans. And it was a really, really good picture, but I looked like an old homeless dude. So emphasis on old.
Well, let's just say you sound much younger than you look, so respect there.
Great.
First off, thanks for coming in and dealing, with our inanity. As you may or may not know, we do these chats occasionally in addition to our regular episodes, and we shoot for more of a conversational style rather than a straight interview, because I've heard a lot of straight interviews, and I prefer the gay ones. No,
well, this isn't going to work then, because I only do straight interviews.
Okay, good. Because we're not prepared for that, so it should be fun.
Good.
So I thought we negotiated with his agent to do a not straight interview.
Well, I'm just hoping this goes in some fun directions. But we wanted to warm you up with a few basic questions, get you started. So here we go. What's your favorite color and why?
What is my favorite color and why?
Yeah.
Do I have to have a reason?
I mean, everybody?
It helps.
My favorite color is blue because it's the best color. Duh.
That's my favorite color, and that's my reason too.
Same for me.
Yeah. Now, some people might say, oh, he's from Kentucky, so he likes blue because of the Kentucky Wildcats, and that's not true.
Yeah, it's the Kentucky Bluegrass.
Which is another misnomer. I've lived in this stupid state for pretty much about half of my life. I've never seen any frickin' bluegrass. It's not a thing.
Where are you from originally, if not Kentucky?
Well, I was born here, and I grew up here. And then when I graduated from college the first time, which was in 1992, to date me, I moved to Florida. So most of my adult life, like my 20s and 30s and up to about 40, I lived in Florida.
Okay.
And then I came back to Kentucky in 2008. And that's where I am now. But hopefully back to Florida soon.
My wife's actually trying to get me to move to Florida. So,
well, come on. It'll be party.
All right. So here's our second warm-up question. Who would win in a fight? Mozart or Beethoven?
Mozart would probably win because Beethoven would never hear it coming.
Excellent reasoning.
That's the best I've got.
All right, this is
Isn't
our
that
last
crazy
question,
though
Mike.
that Beethoven was deaf? I mean, think about that for a second. Think of the music
It's crazy.
in was deaf.
That's amazing.
It must have heightened his orchestrating skills. All right. Okay, so here's one that's kind of unorthodox, as if our other ones weren't already. What words would you say as a kid that you miss saying nowadays due to PC culture?
Oh, wow. There were probably a lot of words because I grew up in the 70s and 80s. So it was pretty much no holds barred.
Oh, that sounds awesome.
Yeah, I mean, and I had a potty mouth too. That's a dirty little secret that my mom never really knew. So like if she's listening to this podcast, the cat's out of the bag. But
She's not.
I won't tell her.
we made a lot of gay jokes. I think the expression that was oft used was that's queer. That's so queer.
Do you remember the game Smear the Queer?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I remember that.
Yeah, we played that.
That would not go over well today.
we played touch football in the street. So we did the whole thing where somebody had to watch and they yell car and everybody run out of the street, flip off the person drove by. Childhood was so different then. Now it's like we don't let kids out of the house because we're scared. But that's one more stuff.
All right. I think we're warmed up.
Yeah, thanks for having some fun.
So what I wanted to do, I mean, we've said your name, but we haven't really introduced you properly yet. So I wanted to go ahead and do that. Today we've got Mike Maharrey on. And honestly, I was thinking about this before we did this, and I was like, I am not sure I could ever hope to remember everything that you do. I honestly think you're busier than Tom Woods. But I'm going to try to name all the things that you do off the top of my head.
All right.
Okay. You're the communications director at the 10th Amendment Center. You do a fair amount of live streams and videos. Mm-hmm. And you're like the guy that's on every podcast, apparently. There's Thoughts from My Hairy Head, Sports Ball, Godarchy, and Schiff Gold's Friday Gold Wrap. Am I missing anything?
Nope. Those are the things that I do. Of course, so my gig where I make money and actually pay my bills is working for Schiff Gold. So I actually do their website.
Okay.
And so all of the content on schiffgold.com/news is written by me, which a lot of it's just repackaging Peter's videos and stuff. But so yeah, that's my paying gig. And then the 10th Amendment Center is the gig that doesn't pay as well, but probably is where my heart is.
I gotcha. Oh, fun fact though, when we were doing the first version of this podcast with Kim, she came to me and she said, and I feel like we had an awkward conversation about this, because she came to me and she said, hey, we should interview Mike Maharrey. And like immediately I was like, yes, I like Mike. Let's talk to Mike. And then I think I asked her something like, what would we talk to him about? And she goes, well, I mean, we could talk about the 10th Amendment. We could talk about gold. And I'm like, does he have a podcast? And she goes, I think he has a couple. I legitimately only knew you as a person and was totally down to have you on the show just for that.
Nice.
Yeah, I thought it was because she was like, do you know who he is? And I was like, he's Mike, who I talked to on Facebook.
Right? Yeah. One of the faceless Facebook friends. Actually, my picture's on my Facebook now, but
but that was so funny to me because she was like, you really didn't know who he was. I was like, I just knew him as a person, so I guess that's good.
I guess that's good, yeah.
Yeah. So, question that I'm sure you've been asked before on a libertarian podcast. What was your original political ideology? What flavor statist were you?
Oh, I was a right-wing Christian right kind of guy.
Moral majority.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, the televangelist always annoyed me as a Christian, so I wasn't really like the Jerry Falwell group, but that was my orientation. I wanted the government to tell everybody how they should live, and we shouldn't have those kids out there smoking weed, and law and order and all that kind of things. And of course, Rush Limbaugh was a big influence. Like, I started listening to Rush Limbaugh in the first Gulf War, so I'm a very now repentant warmonger from way back.
Oh, I am too.
Yeah.
Not quite as far back, but
well, yeah, but yeah, that was pretty much me. I was a Republican. The one thing that was always pretty consistent with me, and what was kind of my window into the liberty movement, is I always had this belief in the concept of quote unquote limited government. I didn't understand at the time that Republicans really didn't believe in limited government, but they said they did. So I was the limited government guy. And that's kind of what got me involved in the 10th Amendment Center. Of course, little did I know that was a bunch of crazy libertarians and not right-wing conservatives. But so yeah, I was the right-wing statist, and took me a while to come out of that, but.
And so it was the 10th Amendment Center and Michael Bolden that moved you in that direction? Yeah,
absolutely. So I was I got politically involved during the Tea Party. Like a lot of people, I was concerned about Obama and the potential for government health care. Got that anyway. And I got caught up in that whole Tea Party thing and went to some rallies here in town. And the Tea Party was an interesting thing because it wasn't, especially early on, it wasn't homogeneous. Like, I think it got co-opted by the Republicans and
it definitely did,
conservatives. But here in Lexington, there were a lot of Ron Paul people in the Tea Party movement. So I got to know some people that at the time I didn't realize that they were as radical as I now know that they are. But I just felt like, at that point, my kids were starting to get into school age, and you start thinking about their future. And it was one of those deals where, like, I probably ought to do something more than hold a sign in the rain and vote. And so I started looking for ways to get involved. And I had just finished a journalism degree, and I've always enjoyed writing. And so I was kind of looking for a place I could plug in and do some writing. And over there at the 10th Amendment Center, they'll pretty much take anybody. So I filled out the volunteer form, and the next thing I knew, I was the national communications director. And from there, it was kind of a whirlwind experience. I think, what was pretty cool was that the people that I was surrounded with, especially early on, we were doing these Nullify Now events that were live events, and we did one in Philadelphia, we did one down in Austin, Texas, Jacksonville, Florida, just various places. And it was like a whole day of nullification and constitution. And Tom Woods was the keynote speaker at a lot of those events. So I got to know Tom, and you start absorbing stuff by osmosis. And I'll tell you my favorite early days of my trek into libertarianism, or little L libertarianism, let's be clear. I've told this on a couple other podcasts, but I think it's funny. So I had been with the 10th Amendment Center not a year, so I was still full-fledged neocon mode, especially in terms of foreign policy. And we were down in Austin, Texas, and Bolden is like, okay, we're going to go to, I don't even remember what we were going to, but some event. And we got to pick up this dude named Scott Horton. I was like, all right, cool. Let's, So, picture this. I'm sitting in the back seat of this car. Bolden's in the front seat. I don't remember who was driving. And Horton gets in the back seat next to me and immediately launches into some tirade about who knows what. And the next thing I know, he's like almost yelling at the top of his lungs, "F the state, F the state." I'm like, what in the world have I gotten myself into? These people are absolutely nuts and insane. And then they took me to an anti-war rally. So, so that was fun. And it's, it's funny because Scott just totally freaked me out. I wasn't quite ready for Scott at that point, but now I count him among my friends. So,
well, speaking of anti-war, when you were a filthy statist, where were you on foreign policy? Were you a war hawk, or were you kind of an isolationist?
No, I was a total war hog.
Ah,
Dirty little secret about Mike Maharrey that I'm not sure that there aren't still traces of this out on the internet, because the internet saves everything. But for a while, I actually did a blog that was basically a repost of military press releases. So,
oh wow.
yeah, that's nasty. So yeah, I was in just background wise, my grandfather was career Army, and he was, still is, somebody that I greatly respect. He's passed away now, but so, very strong military background. He went in to the military at the beginning of World War II and stayed in until the end of Vietnam. And so I was always, as a little kid, just fascinated with military stuff. I still am, to be honest, like military aircraft and all that kind of stuff. It fascinates me. So yeah, I was pretty much, we gotta get them over there so they don't get us over here, and I bought all of that BS.
Our freedoms are in a cave in Afghanistan.
Yes, they are, and we need to wrangle them out of there. And it's sad, but like Gulf War I, I remember I just gotten finished with college, and I remember sitting in she was my girlfriend at the time. She was ended up being my first wife. I remember sitting in her apartment on the couch, like having snacks and stuff. Like this was some kind of, like Game of Thrones. You were going to go watch what's going on in the war today.
Yeah. Didn't they have the wars version of baseball cards? I've heard someone say that it may be a joke because I was too young.
No, they did. What they did, or was that the Second War? They did have the playing cards where they had the most wanted. That was after 9/11, I think.
Oh, the VIP ones, the high value targets.
Yeah, I remember that. And I remember, that what's scary is you realize in retrospect, once you take that pill and you start to see the reality, you realize how effective propaganda is.
Oh yeah.
Now you can see it. Now it's like, oh God, here we go. But I remember very specifically Gulf War I. The big thing that they told us was that the Iraqis were throwing babies out of incubators.
Right, I remember that.
That was the big thing. And we're like, oh my God, we got to kill all these bastards because they're throwing babies out of incubators. Who does that? And meanwhile, we're mowing down people on a road. And of course, that was all BS. It's always BS, but and now, so the version now is, they gas their own people, or who knows what it is that the Iranians are going to do that's going to be horrible, that's going to outrage everybody to support that war. But
well, they already put their country way too close to our military bases, so they're off to a bad start.
Those bastards. I mean, I can't believe they aren't more appreciative of the coup in 1954, where we overthrew their government and started this whole chain of events. We go in and help them. We fix their government. They should be grateful, right? We like people meddling in our election. Oh, wait.
They just need a couple more Starbucks over there and they'll be good.
Absolutely.
So you kind of, got into it with your background and kind of just being, foisted into the 10th Amendment Center. But what originally got you interested in the Constitution? Was it your involvement with the 10th Amendment Center, or did you have an interest in it before then?
Yeah, I had I've always been kind of for lack of a better term, a history nerd. So I enjoy all aspects of history. Just, I find it fascinating. And like I said, there was this sense, and I was raised in that conservative environment where limited government is a good thing. And I was semi-literate enough about the Constitution to know that there were some things in there that purported to make our system limited government. And I understood the concept of the 10th Amendment, although not nearly as fully as I ended up. And so that was kind of the end. It's like, okay, we need limited government. We've got this Barack Obama fella in here, and he's doing all of these horrible things. And so we need him to follow the Constitution. And so that was kind of the end. And then when I actually started working with the 10th Amendment Center, and I learned about this idea of nullification, which I still think is one of the coolest things ever in the history of politics. And I realized what the Constitution was actually purported to mean, and how far and how quickly it drifted away from that. I think even if you're a hardcore anarchist, and you hold the Lysander Spooner view that the whole thing is useless, I still think it's good for anybody who is interested in politics at all to understand what the Constitution actually was supposed to do. If for no other reason, it's a good example of how this thing called government is always going to grow and expand, and its tentacles are going to overreach whatever quote unquote limits we try to put around it. And the Constitution is a great example of that.
So what would you say was, I know you didn't take the whole bottle, but what would you say was the red pill that took you from minarchist or constitutionalist to straight up anarchist?
Well, it was kind of a progressive thing, and I do have a moment that I can tell you when I finally let go of that foreign policy stuff. That was the last thing that I really struggled with. But it was really kind of a gradual progression. I think the first thing was the ugly reality that Republicans are not limited government, because that was always, I was in that two-party left-right mindset. And so the Republicans were limited government and the Democrats were big government. And after about a year with the 10th Amendment Center, I was like, all of these people are big government. These Republicans don't mean it either. And that's kind of the irony of the 10th Amendment Center. That's really why it was created. Michael Bolden founded it after 9/11 when Bush was president, basically to kind of stick a finger in the eye of the conservatives and say, look, you don't really respect this thing that you swear that you respect. So that was when the political scale started to fall away, and I started to realize that they're all full of crap. The thing that I think was the final turning point, and just being around people like Woods, then you start reading things from the Mises Institute, and then the next thing you know, you're starting to read Rothbard, and it's so you kind of start going down that rabbit hole. And I remember specifically though a speech that Tom did, and he was talking about foreign policy, and he said that basically the same people that are running the domestic policy that you hate are also running the foreign policy that you love. And I was like, oh, I mean, that seems rather common sense, but it really, the way he put it kind of cut through that. And I was like, oh crap, these people suck at everything. Maybe we shouldn't have them. And yeah, so then it was like, and then one day I was like, holy shit, I'm an anarchist.
Yeah, well, and because I'm super boring. My turn into libertarianism was a single Ron Paul video.
Well, hey, what's weird? People always talk about Ron Paul stories, and even like early on in my foray into the liberty movement, I never really did. Like Ron Paul had almost no influence on me. Like today, I really respect him, and it's cool looking back. And he's one of the people. I don't have a really big list of people that I'd like to meet, but I would like to meet Ron Paul. But everybody talks about they're back in the Ron Paul days, and I'm like, yeah, I thought he was a nut.
Well, my thing was because I was in like 6th or 7th grade when 9/11 happened, and I thought there was going to be a World War III, and I was going to fight, blah blah blah. And I lived in that area for a while. I was scared of Obama, so I voted for John McCain and hated myself shortly after. Yeah. But there was a video that Ron Paul did, or not. It's not even the video. He did a speech. I think it's called Imagine, and he talks about imagine if there was a Chinese occupying force in Texas, and how we would feel about that. And it was that was the moment. That was my red pill where like, wow, it wasn't even so much like, oh, I have to look into libertarianism to see if I agree with this stuff. It was like, oh, wow, I found exactly what I've been thinking this whole time, but not understanding that was even an option.
Yeah. I've been thinking about this a lot. This whole idea of dehumanizing people.
Oh, yeah.
I wrote an article about it for the Godarchy site that got quite a bit of traction. And it was based off of a C.S. Lewis quote that basically he was saying, from a Christian perspective, if you recognize that everybody that's around you is potentially somebody that you'll be standing shoulder to shoulder in perfection in heaven, you treat people a lot different, and a lot of the things that we see in politics that are gross and evil have at their root this dehumanization, this other, we're going to make these people the other. And when you can really, that's one of the things that I want to do. That's one of my goals in my work, particularly over at Godarchy, that's directed at a Christian audience. I want to hit them in the head hard enough that they pause and think, oh, these are real people over there that we're drone striking and bombing their weddings. And, no matter what you think about immigration, Mexicans are people. They're not this glob of evil that are hoarding over the borders. And just to think of people as individuals and to treat them as individuals. And I mean, even going to when you get into really contentious things like identity politics and racial politics. I get so frustrated the way everybody, we want to put black people in a box, and we use this term black people as if every black person has the same views and ideas, and every white person has privilege. And, anybody that believes that bullshit's never been in Appalachia, because I can show you a bunch of white people that ain't got no privilege.
Oh, yeah.
And both sides of it drives me crazy, because it becomes this polarized, I'm going off the rails here and hijacking the conversation, but this
no, you're good, man.
It's been in my head. When it comes to this identity politics, especially when it comes to race, you've got this big group of people on the left that want every damn thing to be racism. Everything's racist. I'm probably racist because I said racism. And then you've got on the other side, and I think it's almost a slap back, or a blowback from that. But then you've got a bunch of people over here that think that, oh, there's no racism. There is no racism. And I've had people tell me that there's no racism. Well, I've never understood it with my own eyes. And so it's so frustrating to me. I'm here in the middle just trying to live my life, and both sides of this argument are making it really hard for me. But again, it's grouping people into silos and attributing attitudes and beliefs and behaviors to whole groups of people when everybody's an individual. I say this all the time about my wife. She has much more in common with a poor white person in Appalachia, having grown up in rural West Virginia, than she does with a black kid that grew up in the inner city of Chicago. That's not her experience. Her experience as a black woman is in a rural setting. It's completely different. So to assume that she's going to have the same view and the same culture and the same ideas as somebody that was in the inner cities is absurd.
Yeah. And one thing, I was actually talking to a friend of mine the other day, and he was kind of commenting on the fact that I am more willing to make kind of off-color jokes than I used to be. Mm-hmm. And it's because I thrive, like, it's just part of who I am. When something bad happens to me, I go to dark humor. Right. I go to gallows humor. That's just how I work. And it's how I've always worked. But he was like, used to, you wouldn't go to these places. And he was like, I don't make a lot of racial jokes, but I'm not, like, when I'm hanging out with a black friend, I'm not opposed to, he cracks on me for whiteness, I crack on him for blackness. And so it was... He was saying what happened, because there was a change. And for me, when I was like 19 years old, I went on tour with a praise and worship band, of all things. And one of the guys, our sound guy, was a black dude. Yeah. And someone had made a joke and had said the N-word, with an A instead of the hard R. Right. And I was this 18-year-old kid from Alabama, by the way, who had never heard it really used much at all. Yeah. And so, like, I had this, like, look of, white guilt, I guess. And he goes, don't you dare be offended for me. Yeah. And I was like, what? And he was like, dude, it's not your place to be offended for me. And I was like, okay, I don't know how to deal with what you just said. Yeah, what? I'm sorry. And he goes, no, you have to realize who we are people, and we're individuals. And he said, that guy right there was making a joke. I'm cool with that guy. If he started coming at me, that'd be a different thing, and I'd be more than happy to let you fight with me, And he was like, but he goes, one of the things that really threw me, he looks at me and he goes, I'm so damn tired of these white people getting offended for me, fighting for me, and acting like I'm their favorite pet. And I was like, oh, what do I do with this?
Yeah. That's interesting because my wife has very similar attitude. Her phrase is, come down off that cross. You didn't die for me. I don't need you to die for me. And it's particularly galling with the upper middle class white leftists.
Yes.
Who have it is so, and they don't realize it, but it is so condescending. Oh, these poor little black people need my help. I don't need your damn help.
Yeah. I didn't realize what was going on either. I didn't realize I had white guilt until a black person pointed it out.
Right? And again, different people have different experiences. So now we're really going off the rails, but I'll tell this story because I think it's interesting. We just had one of these episodes here in Lexington, Kentucky, for those who don't know, where a prominent personality stuck his foot in his mouth on air. He made a joke about the princess's baby in relation to a monkey. Apparently, I think
I heard about this.
Yeah, well, so apparently some DJ in England had made the joke, and he had gotten fired. So Lee, who is a comedian, is on a local show, and he kind of flies by the seat of his pants. And he's making jokes about this DJ, and he said something like, well, this is my favorite DJ now, because he thought it was funny. He didn't realize the context. And he was like me. I don't follow the royal family. I don't give two craps about the royal family. I had no idea that she had any African American, or I guess she's be African British or whatever she is. I had no idea. So he's making this comment.
She's actually from America.
Okay, well, so she would be African American. My wife hates that term too, by the way.
My friend did too. He was like, "You call me black."
Yeah. He goes, she's like, I ain't never been to Africa. So anyway, yeah. So Lee stuck his foot in it. Of course, he gets fired, and this stuff concerns me not only because of the racial elements of it, but because I think there's an element of free speech where we're becoming so sensitive about words that you can't say anything. And I made a post about it on my Facebook page because I'm good friends with Lee. I know him. I know when he realized what happened, he was mortified.
Mm-hmm.
He is somebody that actually has done a lot for the black community here in Lexington. And of course, everybody was split, and some people thought, well, he's got to be fired. And so anyway, I posted this on my Facebook page and made the mistake of making it public. Oh. And pretty soon, I'm starting to see comments from all kinds of people that I don't know.
Uh-oh. That's never good.
No. So I shut it down pretty fast. But I actually had a conversation with the guy. And, he was a few of the people, there was some black women on there that were basically just riding me down the road. This guy was a little bit more reasonable. And so we had some back and forth and ended it civilly. And I started thinking about it. I actually messaged the guy and said, hey, would you be interested in having lunch? Because I could tell that he had some experiences that obviously have affected his viewpoint on things. And we sat down and talked, and we talked a lot about words and the meanings that they have. And like he said that he's about 10 years younger than me, so he's early 40s. And he said that, like, to him, the term monkey, he said, I didn't even really get it. It didn't mean anything to me. He said, but to my dad from his era, it just had this visceral reaction to it. And, what I'm trying to get to with this long, drawn-out rambling is that we need to be sensitive to, and by we, I mean me, and anybody else that cares to, but to be sensitive to people's background and experiences and understand that people see symbols and hear words and they take them in different contexts, and just to be respectful of that. And not to dismiss somebody and say, well, you shouldn't feel that way. It's been really interesting having my mother-in-law moved in with us about a year ago. She's 84. So she experienced real honest to God racism where, she got called the N-word. She got spit on. She has a relative that got caught with a white woman that they were going to lynch that basically got out of town ahead of the mob. To hear the stories that she tells, you can understand why certain words have an emotional impact that they might not have on somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it was interesting talking to this guy. We had a real good talk, and it's just, I don't know. I don't know. What's my point? I don't really have one. It's just that I wish more people I wish we could be better about sitting down and listening to each other instead of yelling at each other on social media.
Yeah. No, I can agree with that. One thing I want to rewind is you were talking about how with military and foreign policy, we view these people overseas as the other, as
right.
inhuman. And I've talked with Phil about this before because he's an ex-jarhead crayon eater. That's something that really hits me too, because I had probably a year or two ago, I was reading this is going to go Christian, but I was reading the book of Jonah, okay. And I was seeing what was happening in which I think it was Syria. It was when Syria. When Obama was wanting to go to Syria, and there was a lot of backlash. And I remember posting something about this and saying, you need to look at the end of Jonah. You need to look at this point in time in the Bible where Jonah had been told by God to go and speak to the other, to the Ninevites, the inhuman, right. Etc. Yes. And said, hey, repent and you'll be saved. And then he went and he did that, and they repented and they were saved. And then that little bastard sat there pissed off that God didn't destroy these people.
Yeah.
And it was one of those things, and it may have actually been something to do with Iraq. I can't remember. There's so many freaking conflicts that I can't
right.
keep it straight.
That could be Yemen, Libya,
but I definitely
Syria.
I definitely mentioned Iraq when I was talking about it, though, because that's essentially the same place that Nineveh was. Uh-huh. And so it was one of those things where I was like, I don't understand how these Christians can look at this situation and see these people who are going to be destroyed and killed and not be able to look at this moment in their history and go, okay, so God's clearly against this.
Yeah. God
is saddened by this.
I am so frustrated by, and people that aren't believers, I feel like I can give them a little bit more of a pass. I guess, if you believe in, I don't know, if you don't believe in the dignity of the individual, I can see how you could justify killing somebody. But people that claim to be believers and people who claim to believe in a God who says that we are all his children, how the church can so vehemently support these wars is just beyond me. That's why I started Godarchy. I want that to be an anti-war voice in the world of Christendom.
Right. Well, I have this, one of the things that really threw me as a Christian, because it was after I hit some Ron Paul and after my views on foreign policy were shifting and changing, and I was really challenging myself in that idea, is when what's his name? Osama bin Laden was killed. Mm-hmm. Right. And this is not someone that there's no reason for you to feel sorry for this person, right?
No.
Like, this is a guy who killed a bunch of people. He deserves everything he gets, you know? Sure. But I'm sitting in a Christian college and the news comes out that he's been killed. And there were people running, like Christian kids running through the quad and stuff like that, screaming and celebrating and all of this. And I had this weird moment that deeply affected me because it went further than I was comfortable with.
Yeah.
Because I sat there and I thought, this death, independent of what's gone on, this is still someone who was once a baby. Yep. Someone who at one point in their life didn't have these evil, awful thoughts and didn't do these evil, awful things. And that, God, despite these actions, still wanted to get to him. Still wanted to find his way to change him. And it was this weird moment where there was this very human, fleshy part of me that was like, I'm so happy this guy is dead.
Right.
And then there's this other spiritual part of me that's like, kind of saddened by this reaction that I'm seeing. And it made no sense to me and it freaked me out. And it really changed a lot of how I view things.
Yeah, that's poignant. That's one of the things I pointed out in this article about unpersoning, is that when you kill somebody, and I actually had a conversation not too long ago with a guy about the death penalty.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I was diehard death penalty, eye for an eye.
Yeah.
And the point that I tried to make to him, and he wasn't buying it, but and this is a believer, I said, when you execute that person, when the state executes that person, and never mind the whole thing about how bad the state is doing it. I'm not sure that we should be trusting it to dispense life or death justice. But setting that aside, let's say the guy is guilty and by all measures of justice deserves to die. The moment that you flip that switch or push that syringe, you have terminated that person's opportunity to ever repent, to ever make right with God. And we're taught that nobody is too far away from God, right? So how can you, I understand, lock the dude up, and then he got all pragmatic. Well, it costs a lot of money to keep people in jail, but the point being, and again, I'm talking to Christians here, but if you believe what Jesus taught, then you need to live what Jesus taught. And Jesus didn't teach all of this right-wing statism that's out there in terms of what we do with people's lives. And, there's a U.S. senator, was it Hunter? He's out in California. I think it's Hunter.
Duncan Hunter?
Yeah, Duncan Hunter. Did you see the comments that he made the other day about how he was an artillery officer and I'm certain that I killed all kinds of civilians and, no big deal. I'm like, what a piece of garbage.
Yeah, he just said it so nonchalantly, like it was almost cool that he did it.
Yeah, it's like Phil and I were talking about in the last episode about his friend who was a Marine saying that the only reason he's voting for Trump in 2020 is because he pardoned Eddie Gallagher.
Yeah.
Or is thinking about pardoning him.
And I don't like the blame the soldier stuff bothers me. Like you see some of the hardcore anarchists will really go hard after anybody that served in the military, and there was a little bit of that on the comments when I posted that article on the Godarchy page. In anybody's defense who runs a military, we are immersed in statism. We are victims, all of us, of this propaganda. We start saying that stupid Pledge of Allegiance from the time we're in preschool, and we're taught that all of our causes are just, and there's nothing better than to serve. And I mean, you put an 18-year-old and put a recruiter in front of him and promise him college, and well, hell, why not join? I mean, I wanted to be a Navy pilot.
I thought about it too. I
applied to ROTC. I don't like to blame the soldier. But when you have somebody that is so disconnected from what they have done, because most people, like my grandfather, I mentioned him, he served in the Army for, 42, 52, 62, almost 30 years. And he was very proud of his service. He was very proud that he was in the Army to the day he died. But there was also that part of him that understood what he wrestled with what he had done. He especially wrestled with Vietnam.
Oh, yeah.
In fact, Vietnam turned him into a very non-interventionist when it comes to – he was certainly no libertarian or anarchist, but he was definitely a non-interventionist because he had seen the impact and the fruitlessness of America's effort to turn Vietnam into some kind of American democratic paradise. So I can respect that. I can respect where he comes from, but I just can't respect somebody that has seen all of that and then is just completely unaffected by it. That boggles my mind.
When we talked about the Eddie Gallagher thing originally, there's a Marine guy that comes into the place I work, and I was kind of saying, I kind of offhandedly said something about it, and because this was the person he killed was a wounded person who was being treated by a medic, and he killed him. And then he also apparently took out a sniper rifle on a couple of occasions and shot civilians.
Yeah, he intentionally targeted civilians.
Right. And so I'm disgusted by this. And this guy looks at me and he was like, "We're at war. We're always at war when we're over there. That's just how it works. I think you should get a pardon." Like, oh God.
Well, and what somebody on that that argument was one of the first comments when I posted that article on Godarchy. You know, somebody made that, well, you know, following orders, we're at war, blah, blah, blah. And the next comment was pretty poignant. They said, yeah, that's what every Nazi thought at Nuremberg.
Yep.
You know, and ultimately we are responsible as individuals, and we're all individualists here. We are individually responsible for the moral decisions that we make. You can't pass the buck. Somebody told me to. Well, you know, like my mom always said, you know, if somebody told you to jump off a high cliff, would you do it? And, you know, I was pretty dumb when I was 14. I probably would have.
Yeah, and it's surprising just, you know, in my role as a police officer when I was in the military, it's surprising. It'll blow your mind how often you're actually told to do things that aren't, you know, by the books. Or, you know, they always say there's letter of the law, spirit of the law, and then that there's always, you know, you have your discretion and you do these things, but all these things that you're told to do that just don't make any sense. And, you know, you have this duty, for lack of a better word, that you're supposed to disobey unlawful orders, but it's just crazy how very few people actually do that. Like, for example, we had, when I was stationed in Yuma, kind of an armpit city here in Arizona, it's an air base, there was an augment, a person from another unit, sent to work with us because we didn't have enough people to man all of our stations. And he was a conscientious objector. So he got sent to us because he refused to deploy with his unit. And it was crazy seeing how, just in the bat of an eye, he was demonized, how everyone turned on him, and this, like you guys were saying, how he was dehumanized in the eyes of everyone else. He was the other. He wasn't one of us anymore. He didn't wear the same uniform as us anymore. He was just some piece of garbage that we all needed to spend, you know, as much time as possible mocking and ridiculing because he was viewed as a coward.
Right, and that actually makes me think of Desmond Doss. Do you know Desmond Doss?
No.
I'm sure Mike does.
No, I'm not familiar.
There was a movie, I'm pretty sure Mel Gibson directed it, I can't remember, but it starred Andrew Garfield, and it was about Desmond Doss. And he was a conscientious objector that went to war. And while he was at war, I mean, he went to join the military, but he refused to have a gun. He refused to fight. He refused to do all sorts of things. But he decided what he was going to do was be a medic. And so there's a movie out there that you should definitely watch about it. But there was this one battle, and he was pulling people, like, you know, friend and enemy alike, pulling people out so that he could help them, so he could save them. And like, it's an incredible movie. And I'm gonna have to Google it so I can tell you what it's called.
Hacksaw Ridge.
Yes, Hacksaw Ridge. So good. And it's like that's the kind of person that I'm not a pacifist. I'm all about non-aggression, but my God, that's a person that I could look up to.
Yeah. You know, I'm a believer that you're talking about that culture. I'm a believer in, well, when I was in school the first time, so I have an accounting degree. This is a little known fact about Mike Maharrey. Actually, I have an accounting degree.
Is it you're a nerd?
Degree. No, everybody knows that. That's not a secret. But so I took a lot of business classes, and I had a really, really good business management course that I took. And one of the things that I still remember from that, and this was my first foray through school, so it was a long time ago, but this whole idea of corporate culture and how various organizations, companies, they develop their own identity and their own culture and their own way of doing things, and new people that are brought into it are quickly pushed to conform to that culture. Mm-hmm. And I think that's very true, not just of companies and organizations, but also things like the military and government agencies and all of these things. They have these cultures, and it's very difficult for individuals, even people in leadership positions, to change the momentum of those things. And there's a guy named William Stringfellow that wrote a book. It's I can't remember the title of it. It's about Christian ethics, and he terms all of these things in the way he terms it is that these are all principalities. So he's going off those verses in Ephesians, and he's almost saying, I haven't finished the book yet, so I'm not quite sure exactly what he's saying specifically, But where I feel like he's going is that these institutions have a spiritual life of their own, and they take on an identity of their own, and they ultimately will swallow up the individuals that are in them. Unless you are an extremely strong individual, it's very difficult to resist the momentum of these institutions. So, what you're saying with the conscientious objector, he is going against that culture, that flow, and so everybody, it's almost an obligation. We've got to get this guy to conform, and where you really see this is in police. That's the problem in policing, is that it has adopted this militarized, almost a literal army, as opposed to back in the 70s and the 60s it was protect and serve. Well, now they've turned that into command and control, and you are indoctrinated into this, and you're indoctrinated that everybody's the enemy and every dog's gonna bite you, so you shoot the dog, and everybody's resisting, and you see this play out on a daily basis with the way people are treated, and the way that everybody says, well, it's just a few bad cops, but it is the culture that they're in, and that's why it is allowed to continue, because nobody's willing to call them out, because it's part of the culture.
Right, and I love that people say, it's just a few bad apples, and I'm like, did you forget the second half of that saying? A few bad apples ruin the bunch. Like, how are you saying the first half of that as a defense? Like,
because they're retarded.
You want to hear something funny about protect and serve? When I was in MP school in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, one of the instructors there, during our kind of onboarding, our kind of introduction to first few days there, like what's going to go on, he said, show of hands, how many people are familiar with the phrase protect and serve, cops that are protect and serve? And of course, everybody, all of us raise our hand, and he says, forget everything you know about that. It's suspect and unnerve. Everyone's up to something.
I just got back from Washington, D.C. I went to Washington, D.C. yesterday.
Ooh.
I told me, yeah, no, you. I went actually to do a documentary, so it was kind of a cool thing. And I only had to be there for one day. I flew in the morning and out in the evening, so I don't think I got anything on me. I have this weird relationship with Washington, D.C., because there's a lot of things about it I really like, and that's the history nerd in me. It's just, there is so much history there, and I love the museums and statues and artwork and all that stuff. But there is a sense that it feels to me now, very oppressive, and in the sense of, I feel like everybody's watching me, and there's 657 million cops, and I just find that unnerving. And then on a side note, the TSA agent at Reagan touched my balls, and I did not like that.
Can I say something that's been on my mind, and I've not been able to work it into our show just yet? I am so tired.
The show went off the rails a long time ago. So.
Well, here's the thing. Like, if I see one more libertarian argument that starts with a debt clock, I'm going to blow my brains out. I am so tired of pragmatic arguments that it's crazy. I don't know if I'm crazy for this, but I've moved full into moral arguments.
Oh yeah,
that's where I am. I'm not going to talk to you about how much this or that costs. I'm going to talk to you about that person who's dying, that person who's stolen from. Like, does that bother you as much as it bothers me, or am I just being sensitive? Well,
I tell you where. No, I think you're dead on, and it's funny because I told somebody the other day, if you go look at the Godarchy website, which is godarchy.org, shameless plug.
Oh, those are allowed.
You'll see that I've written the same article like 500 times. I mean, it seems like every article that I write for that site is that government is violence, coercion, and force. If I can't do anything else, I want to make statists own the fact that what they're advocating is violence, coercion, and force. No matter what they're trying to do, no matter how great they think their program is, or how beneficial it is, or how you are advocating violence, coercion, and force. And that's exactly what you're saying. It's that moral argument. And, to take it a step away from our position and just going into the whole idea of the Constitution. I mean, you've got this Constitution that everybody says this is the rule of law, right? And yet all of the arguments that you hear in politics in the United States, nobody ever asks, is this constitutional?
Right.
The question is, it's the debt clock, Is the tariff going to bring China to the table, or is the tariff going to, ruin the American economy? Well, the first question you should ask is, does the president have the authority to unilaterally lay a tariff? No, the answer is. But we just ignore all of that. So that's kind of what we do at the 10th Amendment Centers. We keep making these principled arguments based on the Constitution. And again, even if you're sitting there going, oh, here goes Maharrey with this stupid Constitution. It's not fit to exist. I get it. I've heard it before. You're not telling me anything I don't know. I think one of the things that we do effectively at the 10th Amendment Center that I think is important is we erode this idea that you really care about the Constitution. Again, it's making people – I want people to own the moral or the theoretical position that they're taking and quit deluding themselves that there's something else. Republican, you are not a limited government guy. Democrat, progressive, you are not on the moral high ground because you want to take my stuff and give it to somebody else. Warmonger, you're not protecting my freedoms, you're killing brown people. Make people own those positions that they're trying to take and wrap up in this status BS.
Yeah, no, and that's what's kind of funny is like I've been in a lot of liberty groups. One of the ones that was actually really seminal to me was one called the Academy for the Study of Liberty. Mm-hmm. Which has Suzanne Sherman, and I don't know if you know Carl Jones, Dave Benner, like that. Carl Jones is actually a guy that worked with my dad.
Oh, okay, I know Carl pretty well.
Yeah, Carl's great.
Benner's a bigger nerd than I am.
I think he has more tattoos though.
Oh yeah, he definitely has more tattoos.
but that
His
was
entire back is covered with a tattoo.
But that was one of the, like, Carl was one of the huge things for me, was because I was like, okay, I'm done with this crap. Can I be an anarchist? And he goes, you can be an anarcho-capitalist. And I was like, to Google I go. But
right.
But that was the thing. Like, I was in all these different liberty groups, and people just assumed because I could talk Constitution that I was a minarchist.
Right.
And that, and I don't really use the word anarchist just because, like semantically I have issues. And also it turns people off. So if I'm being absolutely clear, for me, I use the term patient monarchist because I'm living in a world that has a state, but I'm waiting for Christ to be king.
Right.
Kind of where I am.
That's cool. I like that.
But no, so everyone just thought I was this minarchist, and it was hilarious because the minarchists would come to me to fight the anarchists, and then the anarchists would come to me to fight the minarchists who weren't using the Constitution correctly. And I'm in the middle, and both sides would come to me. I'm like, you both are irritating me. Stop.
Shut up.
Just we're all going in the same general direction. Let's work this a little better. But that's what was so funny, because I was just Constitution, and I'm at this point right now where I'm like, yeah, I will talk Constitution. I will, I'll bitch about incorporation doctrine, right. But like I'm past it at this point, in a sense. I'm just like, right. I'm done. I can't handle the Constitution anymore, because what good has it done?
Yeah.
And it's frustrating.
For me, I feel like I have my feet in two worlds, like one foot in each world. And it's weird because I've gotten a boatload of friend requests over the last 6 months or so. And a lot of them are, so I get the anarchists who don't realize that I do the Constitution stuff. And then I get the Constitution people that don't realize I'm an anarchist.
Yeah.
And so it freaks both of them out. To me, the Constitution is a tool. It is I think there's two important things that we need to do as advocates for liberty. And some people are going to do one thing, and some are going to do the other thing, and some, like me, are going to do both. I think we need people who can articulate the principles, that can make those moral arguments that you're talking about. But we also live in a real world. And as Murray Rothbard said, parroting libertarian principles is not going to get you anywhere in the real world. That's a paraphrase.
Yeah.
It's actually a really good quote, much better than I just put it. I do the work at the 10th Amendment Center because that is one place that I see actual work that's being done that is helping to break down and attack the federal government, which
The state, yeah.
to me, I think the biggest threat to liberty is centralized power.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
All government sucks. State governments suck. Local governments suck. My local government is suing me, so I can tell you how bad local governments suck. Centralized power is the most dangerous. So I want to decentralize it, just like I want the economy to be decentralized. I don't want Walmart to run groceries. I want not monopoly government. I don't want monopoly government. And that's what we're doing at the 10th Amendment Center. That's what we're doing with nullification. We're actually using state and local power and ultimately individual power to undermine this tendency toward consolidation. And the cool thing about nullification, too, is that in a subtle way, it teaches people that you don't have to bow down to the big authority, that it's okay to say no. One of my personal heroes is Rosa Parks. And I know some people get all, well, she was a blah, blah, okay, I get it. But the fact that the way she went about what she did, she refused to give up that seat. And yet she was willing to face the consequences. She didn't punch the driver. She didn't burn the bus. She stood her ground. She made her moral case, and then she went to jail. And her actions, symbolic though they were, and she wasn't the first person to not give up her seat, incidentally, but that sparked a movement that ultimately undermined Jim Crow. And I think in most cases, when the federal government does something, it's almost always following individuals and then local and then state action. Perfect example is weed. First off, people have been smoking weed forever, right? And then 1996, California legalizes medical marijuana, and the federal government cracked down so hard. You want to talk about some heroes. Those folks that endured the early days of medical marijuana when their dispensaries were getting shut down and people were getting hauled off to jail, and then they were reopening them 4 hours later. Those people had gets. I say this all the time. If the gun people had nearly the gonads of the weed people, we could nullify the federal gun laws with just like that. Federal government can't enforce all this crap. But the problem is that all the right wingers, we've got to wait for the Supreme Court to give us permission to utilize our rights. That's just stupid. So anyway, my point is that this whole process of nullification, it subtly undermines that idea of authority, and it says, you know what? Maybe the smaller body has a little bit of authority that it can exercise, or maybe the individual has some authority that he or she can exercise. So that's why I do what I do. It's not because I have any great reverence for the Constitution, although I think for what it was at its time, I think it was a pretty amazing advance. You look at some of the stuff that Jefferson wrote, and he was like almost there. He actually talked about in one of the letters he wrote, he talked about the fact that he wasn't quite certain that one generation could bind the next. So maybe we should have a new constitution like every 30 years. He was kind of getting to this point where he was thinking about this idea of consent, and that, I can't consent for somebody that's dead. And so you see these thinkers at that time, and considering where they came from, from the idea that the monarch is the end all be all, to this idea of government by consent, and then that government actually has limits. That was radical, that you're going to write down limits on government. So and it's like we got to that point, and then it just stopped. And it's like, come on, people, let's take that next step. And that nullification is
one of my favorite concepts as well. I mean, it's funny because I'm from Alabama. I'm from Birmingham, and
Alabama.
Oh yeah, I moved here to Georgia about a year ago, and 3-4 years ago, I was telling my mom, who's in she runs a ministry that helps women who've had abortions, and I've been privy to the pro-life movement my whole life.
Right.
And people keep saying, how are we going to overturn Roe versus Wade? How are we going to make blah blah blah? And I was like, it's never going to work that way. You have to nullify. The state has to decide that they're going to make their laws and change things the way they want to change them. And my mom thought I was insane. She was like, it can't be state by state. It has to be blah, blah. And I was like, that's the only way it's going to happen. And I even had a Facebook post about it. And then, what was it, last month? Alabama nullified Roe versus Wade.
Yeah.
And
the Alabama governor signed the marriage bill too. So they're getting rid of marriage licenses.
Yeah, and that's what's so funny is because I actually took a screenshot of that Facebook post from 3 years ago, and I sent it to my mom. I texted it to her.
Here you go, Mom.
And she goes, you called it. I never would have thought that would have happened. I was like, okay. She was like, and so it's funny. Since then, and also since I told her that back, years ago that the war in Iraq was gonna cause a lot of bigger issues that they didn't foresee, ISIS. And she said it twice. She's come back to me and she's been like, okay, so you were right about Iraq. And okay, so you were right about nullification. And so then some other thing came up the other day and she was like, okay, I want your analysis on this. What has to happen?
You're like your mom's Peter Schiff,
So it was so funny because I was just like, I can't believe this is happening. Because my dad yelled at me about how much Iraq needed to be bombed and stuff. And I was like, no. Right. I was so mad.
That's pretty wild. Yeah, that's I'll give you a perfect example of the way the federal government and the politicians follow the leader. Really cool issue was right to try. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that.
Yeah. I mean, Donald Trump was for that, wasn't he?
Yeah, he signed a national right to try. Of course, by the time the federal government got around to doing it, 40 states had already done it. And so it's just like weed. It's just like hemp. When the feds realize that something is out of their control, then they're going to rush in and do something and then try to take credit for it. Like, oh, look, we fixed this. No, you didn't. It was being fixed long before you voted into that.
Yeah,
on your white horse.
Right, and that's the one thing the federal government's good at is saying, you know what? I know you have your laws that the Constitution says that you should be able to write and the freedoms that the Constitution says the states and the people have, but I'm going to ignore that because the 14th Amendment.
Yeah.
And that brings me into something that Cam was telling me about the other day, because I'm not too familiar with what's called the incorporation doctrine, and he told me a little bit about it and how the feds essentially use the 14th Amendment against the states, to get compliance.
Right.
But Cam's pretty dumb, and I don't trust what he says most of the time. So I was wondering if you can give a layman like myself maybe a breakdown of what that is, and if it's as awful as Cam told me it was.
Yes, it's the most awful, horrible thing in the world. And unfortunately, there are a lot of libertarians, particularly in the LP, who
particularly
love
the weed boys.
Doctrine.
Oh, surprising.
Gun people like the incorporation doctrine too. So here's the rundown. We've got the Bill of Rights in the Constitution, right?
Right.
Now, the first thing that people get wrong, a lot of people, is that they think the Bill of Rights gives them rights. Well, that's absurd. The government doesn't give you rights. And the people who wrote the Bill of Rights didn't think that. The Bill of Rights should have been called a Bill of Restrictions. It restricts the actions of the government. It says, government, you shall not infringe on my right to free speech. You shall not infringe on my right to free religion. You shall not infringe on my privacy. You shall give me due process. Bill of Rights is a restriction on government.
Right.
The federal government.
Right. Because I was getting ready to, that was my next step. What government? Well, if you look at the preamble to the Bill of Rights, and like 99% of Americans don't even realize the Bill of Rights has a preamble. But if you read the preamble to the Bill of Rights, it's very, very clear that it was a restriction on the federal government, which makes sense. The Constitution created the federal government. Therefore, any restrictions are going to apply to the government that it's attached to, and that's the federal government. And there is absolutely, I will say this emphatically, there is absolutely no founding era evidence that anybody ever thought the Bill of Rights was going to apply to the states. All of the state constitutions have their own Bill of Rights, which would be kind of redundant and dumb if it was all covered under the federal Bill of Rights. You can look at the opinion that George Marshall wrote. I just had a feeling that I said his name wrong. We'll say Marshall because I think I said his first name wrong. But anyway.
Was it John?
I don't know.
Some dead guy.
It was that Supreme Court justice who screwed up the country. But he wrote in Barron versus Baltimore very clearly, and he lays it out perfectly, why the Bill of Rights does not apply to the states. It is attached to the federal government. There's no question about this. And it's interesting because if you go back and you look at the drafting of the Constitution, you look at the Philadelphia Convention, one of the things that James Madison pushed hard for was that the federal government should have a veto over state laws. He wanted that in there, and it was rejected emphatically.
Yeah.
That was not something that was ever going to be ratified. And he actually brought it up again when he wrote the Bill of Rights. If you look at his original draft of the Bill of Rights, you can see the way he wrote it. He wrote it so that some of those rights, particularly the right to free speech, religion, those were going to apply to the states as well, where he put them in the Constitution. That was also changed during the not ratification, but the drafting process. Nobody wanted the federal government policing the states. That was the bottom line.
Yeah.
So fast forward to the 14th Amendment, which was a very specific thing for a very specific purpose. Number one, it was to ensure that the freed slaves were considered citizens primarily because in Dred Scott, that opinion held that black people were not parties to the compact, basically, that slaves were not part of the political society. That's why we could make them be slaves, and that's why even a free black person was not covered by the rights of citizenship, so to speak. And so the 14th Amendment was necessary to ensure that they newly freed slaves were considered full citizens just like everybody else.
Right. And didn't that invent the idea of U.S. citizenship as opposed to state citizenship?
I don't know that I buy that. There's a whole train of thought out there that I don't even want to get into. I call them the gold fringe on the flag people. That will cite all of these statutes and all of this stuff and talk about, I don't know, that I think it's BS and not really practically useful. So I won't get into that. I think there was a conception of American citizenship. People were primarily citizens of their states. That's true. But when you consider the fact that the federal government had control over naturalization, which is the endowing of citizenship, so that implies that there is some type of bigger picture citizenship. Gotcha. But regardless, the second point of the 14th Amendment was to constitutionalize the Civil Rights Act of 1866. So if you look at that Civil Rights Act, it actually lays out and enumerates the privileges that every American, no matter what state they were in, were to have. And they were very basic things like the right to enter into contract, the right to own land, the right to travel freely, very specific basic things that were being denied in some places to the newly freed slaves. There was no sense that it was ever supposed to, for instance, have anything to do with who got to vote or desegregation of schools. I mean, that was absurd. Washington, D.C. had segregated schools at the same time that the 14th Amendment was being ratified. So it clearly wasn't supposed to desegregate schools. I mean, it's just common sense. So long and short of it is the 14th Amendment was not ever meant to apply the Bill of Rights to the states. That's very clear if you look at the drafting and ratification. So fast forward 50 or 55 years, the Supreme Court pulls out of its butt this idea of the incorporation doctrine that somehow the 14th Amendment applies the Bill of Rights to the states and that therefore the courts can overturn state laws and demand that the states do certain things based on the 14th Amendment. So why is that so horrible? Well, it's good if you look at it in a narrow sense, because you're going to say, oh, well, look, the federal government's going to come in and they're going to make sure that the states don't violate our rights. I can make the same argument about the UN, though. Why not
Yeah.
give the UN power to make sure that the United States doesn't violate my rights? Well, the UN doesn't understand well, you know what? Washington, D.C. doesn't understand Alabama either.
Yep.
And therein lies
Yep.
the problem. And what this is it is a centralizing force. And that goes back to my original point. The gravest threat to our liberty is the centralization of power. And when you give the federal government the right to, quote unquote, protect your rights, you're also giving the federal government the right to define your rights. 99 times out of 100, they're going to F you over. And, you can point to certain things. And I actually got into this debate with Nick Sarwark, the illustrious chair of the Libertarian Party. He's a big incorporation doctor. He thinks it's a great idea because he thinks that the federal government has done some things that he likes. Civil Rights Act. And he pointed out to me, in Virginia versus Loving, because he knows that my wife is black, basically the federal government made it so you could be married. And I'm like, this argument doesn't work on me because I don't give two Fs what the state says about my relationship. But,
that's so sleazy.
Super sleazy.
Yeah, it was. So you can look at these various things and you can pick out, okay, this is a good thing. But by and large, it's been a disaster. You look at things like with searches and seizures. The federal courts are notoriously loose on allowing cops to search and seize. And so when the federal government with the incorporation doctrine says, oh yeah, Maryland, you can collect a prisoner's DNA even if they haven't been charged with a crime because they're in your jail or, they've just been arrested. Well, then now that's the standard across the whole country. So you got to take the good with the bad. And I say this to everybody when it comes to government power, because people on the left and the people on the right love to fight over federal power. And when they're in power, they want the federal government to do X, Y, and Z. You should always consider that any power that you give any government entity is at some point going to be in the hands of somebody you don't like. Somebody that is going to abuse that power. So think of it like imagine, I can do this because I have an ex-wife. Imagine that before you give any power to the government, imagine, would you want your ex-wife to have this power?
Yeah.
And if the answer is no, then you probably shouldn't do it. Even though it might do something good in the short run, you're undermining liberty in the long run. You're centralizing authority. You're taking away power from the states. And, well, Mike, the states are going to abuse our rights too. Well, deal with it within your state. Don't go running off to big Uncle Sam to fight your battles for you. If you don't like what's going on in your state, fight it there.
Or move.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
I mean, I'm not saying a love it or leave it guy. I'm not that. But I'm just like, that was kind of one of the original ideas of the Constitution was, hey, we have these different states. We have 50 different freedom/liberty experiments going on. I mean, Massachusetts, I'm pretty sure, had a state church. So obviously, if they had that after the Constitution...
So did Maryland.
Yeah. I mean, so how does incorporation doctrine work? But the idea is you have 50 states. Some are going to be freer than others. California is going to be less free in some ways and more free in others.
Exactly.
Move to the place that you want to be.
Right. And this is something that this didn't really hit me until a couple of months ago. I went out to LA, hang out with Michael Bolden, and people give him crap all the time about living in California, California they call it. And you know what? Most of it are gun people, because you ain't getting a gun in California. That's true. But while we were out there, we went into a weed store, and it was the weirdest thing to me. Now, I'm not a weed guy, although I do take CBD oil. And I bought some illegal CBD pills. I probably shouldn't say this publicly.
You're good. I won't tell anyone.
That have a little bit of THC in them. But anyway, so yeah, it was a weird thing to me. And to stand there in this store, it was like a freaking Apple store. Like, it was pretty cool,
Yeah. I haven't been out there since then. And like I was telling my little sister lived in Colorado for a while. Yeah. And I was like, I want to go visit. And she was like, what would you do while you're here? And I was like, I want to go into a weed store. She was like, you're going to buy weed? It's like, no, I want to go in.
Go in. Yeah. And it's this weirdest feeling to think I could be locked in a cage in Kentucky for being in this weed store. So my point being is that you kind of have to think about, you pick the things that are important to you. And if guns are your thing, then you don't want to live in California. But if you want weed, you want to live in California. Or, California is really, really good on limiting the surveillance state. I mean, at least to whatever degree that you can limit it. Much better than here in Kentucky. I mean, they won't even consider putting any restrictions on surveillance equipment here in my little hometown of Lexington. So, yeah, it's like you're saying, you have these areas of experiment, and whether we want to admit it or not, Americans aren't all the same. Alabama is different than even Kentucky.
Alabama's sure different than Georgia.
California. Yeah, it is.
I don't fit here. It's only 2 hours away, but I don't fit the same here.
Yeah. So
it's insane.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of the old incorporation doctrine. And again, it's because it's a centralizing force. And I will grant you that it will, the federal government every once in a while, as the country folk here in Kentucky say, even a blind squirrel finds a nut every now and again. Every once in a while, you'll get a good ruling from the federal government. But even looking at where people think it's good, like the gun people point to the McDonald decision, and like, oh, see, we're going to get our gun rights. But when you read that decision, there's all kinds of restrictions and loopholes in that I don't think they're aware of. That's going to bring in all kinds of additional gun controls, and red flag laws are a direct result of the way that Supreme Court ruling was written. So, you got to take the good with the bad, and like I said, if the federal government's involved, in my opinion, it's always bad. So,
and since you mentioned it, I don't want to keep you too late because we know you're an old man and you need your sleep.
All right, I gotta get to bed.
But I would like if you can do just kind of a brief. I want to know why you hate surveillance so much and why you're fighting your city.
Yeah, I hate surveillance so much. Actually, the thing that I hate the most is the TSA.
Yeah,
which really has
security
nothing to do with
theater.
But I just wanted to mention that, and really in the big scheme of things, the TSA is probably not the biggest problem facing America. It's not the biggest threat to our liberty, but it's so damn in your face.
Yeah,
it's such a obvious violation of the Fourth Amendment, and it's so in your face, and they do it with such smugness and condescension. And then, having worked in the airline industry, I can tell you emphatically that it is absolutely useless when it comes to actually creating security.
Right. It's just security theater.
Yeah.
It's to make people feel safer.
Well, you can't provide security when you're stealing from people. That's all they do.
Right? Or grab your nuts. But anyway, so the surveillance thing, I think that it's such a big deal to me because that was one of the first policy areas with the 10th Amendment Center that I really immersed myself in. And, we did the off now thing several years ago now, when Snowden came out with his revelations, we were looking, how can we at a state level undermine the surveillance state? So I really got into that, and I started going down the wormhole of reading and studying what was going on with surveillance technology. And when you start reading this stuff, it's easy to not realize it's there. And then once you realize it's there, it starts to creep you out and you become really bizarre and paranoid.
Yeah.
I just went down that wormhole. And when you realize that, police departments have these devices that can lock onto every cell phone within a geographical area and track the location and download information off of those phones without you ever knowing it. When you realize that they can track your movements with facial recognition, when you realize that the federal government has a huge database of license plate numbers where they can connect dates and times that you've been in certain places. And then you start to see and hear the actual impact that happens. And I'll give you an example of this. I think it was out in Kansas. There was this guy that he went to a store. He was in a relatively rural area, and he went to the store that sold like grow lights and all that kind of stuff. So it was a store where a lot of people that grew marijuana would get their gear to do these indoor grows. So this guy goes there, and they had set up an automatic license plate reader, and they were scanning every license plate that came in and out of that store. So he gets in the database, and they do some more searching, and they connect him with some guy that he had maybe some relationship with somehow. I don't remember all of the little coincidental things that they put together. But long story short, one night he's laying in his bed, and all of a sudden there are armed police officers crashing down his door, getting his wife and kids at gunpoint on the floor, terrorizing him. His wife is totally freaking out. He's totally freaking out. Cops tear his house apart, go down in the basement and find his tomato grow. This stuff has real impact on real people. And then you start realizing that when you start doing some study, the way they use surveillance on people like Martin Luther King or Black Lives Matter or Tea Party groups, no matter what you think about their politics, the way that the surveillance state was used, anti-war movement, all of those people were surveilled and tracked. And, it's just, to me, privacy is one of those fundamental rights. It's part of, if you believe in self-ownership, privacy is a fundamental part of self-ownership. I own myself, I own my thoughts, and I own my actions, and nobody else has the right to know what I'm doing. And you get these bizarre arguments, people, well, if you don't have anything to hide, then you've got nothing to fear. Oh, that just drives me crazy.
Well, and it makes no sense when there are, over 10,000 federal laws that they could nab you for?
Yeah,
and there's no way you know any of those?
And even more fundamentally, and I've done, since the city has sued me, and for people who don't know, that little saga, I basically, long story short, I did an open records request to find out about some surveillance technology here in my town, and they don't want to give it up, so they sued me.
How does that work? How do they sue you for asking for information?
Well, it's a stupid law. It's the way that the open records law is written in the state of Kentucky, and not to get too deep into the weeds, but basically if you make an open records request and the entity denies it, then the process is I can appeal that to the state attorney general. So the appeal goes to the attorney general's office. They review it. They have a whole department that's like open records law, and they write these opinions. And so I did that, and the attorney general agreed with me that these documents should be turned over. But the way the statute is written, if either party disagrees with the attorney general, then they can sue to keep the records from being presented, or to if I had been denied, I could have sued to get the police to do it, so it takes it to the courts. But you can't sue the attorney general who issued the opinion. You have to sue the other party. That's just the way the law is written. It's just stupid. And of course, government agencies use that as a chilling effect, because they know that when a constable comes and bangs on Mike Maharrey's door at 8 o'clock at night and serves him with papers, and he reads those papers and he's reading, "You're going to pay the city's court costs," it's like, holy crap, what have I gotten myself into? I don't have any money. I'm not a lawyer. I can't fight this. So they know that in 99 out of 100 cases, unless it's like a big media organization, the person's just going to drop it. They can't fight it. So they get to keep their documents secret. And luckily for me, I'm stubborn. Well, I don't know if that's lucky. Unluckily for them, I'm stubborn and happen to have enough connections where I was able to get the ACLU to represent me. So we actually have oral arguments in the Court of Appeals tomorrow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so we've gone all the way to that level. But so what was the point of that? I don't know, because I was going somewhere with that, with the broader picture of surveillance.
Yeah, you talked about TSA and
we talked.
You hate surveillance.
I hate surveillance.
That's
and you realize that all that I'm asking for is oversight and accountability. I mean, I'm not even going the radical, you shouldn't have this stuff police, which, quite frankly, I don't think they should. But, even being generous and saying, yes, the public persona, yes, there are legitimate law enforcement uses for this technology, but for God's sake, we should at least know that they have it, and they should at least have a plan for using it, and they should at least have some criteria where they can't just willy-nilly, share this data and store it in these databases forever and ever.
Right. And even without that, I can't tell you how paranoid I am these days, because I see cameras every now and then, but I'm paranoid of human beings at this point. Because, when I was a kid, when you were a kid, when Phil was a kid, we were all probably rough boys, right?
Yeah.
We all had bruises. Yeah. We all had this. We all had that. No problem. People were like, oh, a boy was playing. Like, at this point, I'm scared to take my kids to church half the time.
Yeah.
Because they'll see these bruises that they give each other, or fall and do something adventurous, and I'm like, they're gonna tell the state, and the state's gonna take my kids away.
Yeah, it's funny because I've got a huge bruise on my arm from a hockey puck, and I had that thought the other day. Somebody gonna look at that and think my wife is beating me, or.
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm paranoid now because, and part of it's because we went to Target. And my middle son was screaming, and you know how, like, with a kid, you might, like, barely tap their lips when they're screaming, be like, come on, hush now.
Yeah.
Like, nothing violent or anything. This woman brought the security guard, and she goes, I saw you abusing that child.
Oh, my gosh.
And I said, what are you talking about? And she said, you grabbed his mouth and pulled his head back. And I was like, literally none of that happened.
Yeah.
And so the security guard, thank God for private security, walks after she just got him so she could yell at me without consequence.
Right.
And so he tells her, keep going, I'll talk to him. And he goes, I don't know what happened. I doubt what she said happened. But, if you have to discipline your kid, I mean, go to the bathroom, take him out to the car. If you have to spank him, that's fine. But,
right.
And I was like, dude, I appreciate that. But still, I didn't do anything. And he goes,
yeah,
I don't
right.
think you, he goes, I don't think you did. But, he goes, you know how bitches are.
Now, if that had been city police, they would have shot your dog.
Yeah, they would have definitely shot my dog.
They would have come to your house and shot your dog.
Yeah.
But I remember now what I was getting to with the privacy thing.
Yeah.
So being involved in this lawsuit, I've done a lot of radio shows, I've done a lot of interviews, and so I've dealt with this if you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear mantra a lot. I mean, that's the go-to argument. And it's kind of funny because I've been doing this for a while now. People say it to me, and it's like it's almost like they think, I got him. He's never heard this angle before. But this is my return. It's like, dude, why do you have curtains on your windows?
Yeah. Why do you lock your door?
Why do you lock your door? Yeah. And then the other thing, I've done this on a number of radio shows. Yeah. Nobody's ever taken me up on this, but I've every time I've ever done a radio interview and that's come up, I've said, I'll tell you what, I will make this offer to everybody that's out there. Send me the past year of your internet browsing history. Don't delete anything. You can get that information, email it to me, and I'll post it on my website. And to this day, I've not gotten one person that's ever sent me their web browser.
Oh, you don't say.
If they've got nothing to hide.
Yeah. If you got nothing to hide, you got nothing to fear. And that really is the point. Like I said, privacy is a very fundamental thing that we all inherently believe in. It's why we go to the bathroom in little stalls. It's like I said, why we have curtains on our windows.
That's why we wear clothes.
It's not that I'm doing something bad, but I don't want you overhearing my personal conversations. It's none of your damn business. And you take that a step farther, and it's like you said, people will misconstrue and make assumptions. And when the government is involved, then
there's guns involved.
And Glenn Greenwald did a fantastic TED Talk on privacy. And one of the things he said is that when you say I have nothing to hide, what you're saying is you're making yourself so passive and so conformed to what the government expects from you that you don't even care that the government's watching you all the time. That is not a very strong kind of human being. That's not a person that you want to be. And that's like, that's pretty profound, because we all like to think, oh yeah, we're tough individuals. No, you're a bunch of damn bootlickers,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. To be blunt and use I don't like calling people that or calling people sheeple, but some of those.
I just hate sheeple.
Like it's just a dumb word.
Yeah, I hate that. Like, I also hate the word bullcorn, Phil.
Okay, listen, let's get back to the show. Come on.
What was that word?
Bullcorn.
I don't even know what that is. What is that? That's a thing.
It's instead of saying BS, we like to say bullcorn.
No, we don't like to say it.
I was going to say we don't say that in Kentucky.
I say it. He's trying to get me to say bull shark, and I'm not buying it.
Okay. Meanwhile, back at the ranch.
Yeah, now that Cam's ruined the episode.
Yeah, this was going pretty good until then. Now it's lame.
Hey, it's totally lame. I had a good laugh, and that's all that's important to me.
Well, there you go.
All right.
The moral of the story is I hate surveillance because it's invasive, and we're people that own ourselves, and therefore government doesn't have any business poking into what we're doing.
Oh, I agree.
At the least, get a damn warrant.
Yeah, and even then I have issues.
No, yeah, I actually just wrote an article about how here's something that'll creep you out. They're doing these things, they call them geofence warrants.
Oh,
what they'll do is they'll go to a service provider, and they'll basically draw a line on a map, like an area in a map where there was a crime, and they will get all of the electronic devices that pass through that area for within a certain amount of time. So basically, everybody that's in that within that geofence becomes a suspect.
Oh wow!
Oh, that's awful.
And there are judges signing off on these warrants.
Oh, that's oh god.
Which is funny because I got in this debate on. I have a little Facebook page for the activism work in Lexington. It's called We See You Watching Lexington, and some cop got on there and he was like, "You shouldn't be worried about this because the judges will protect you."
What?
Yeah, the judges are going to protect me. I'm like, cop.
They're just going to rubber stamp the warrants and then on to the next one. What is he talking about?
I mean, I think having a warrant requirement is better than not having a warrant requirement, certainly. But
right, but a judge isn't a bulletproof vest.
No, not in this day and age. But anyway.
All right, I think we did well. I think this is good, Mike. I'm glad we had you on. You're definitely better than Ryan.
Now, let's not. I've had Ryan on the Godarchy podcast, and it was a good discussion.
No, we love him. We wouldn't have had him for the first 2 chats that we had if we didn't.
You had him for 2?
Yeah, we did, because we did one with him about techno-agorism, and then we had him come on to talk to us because I had a couple people be like, "What about you? Where'd you come from?" kind of thing. So we're like,
techno-agorism. Talk about nerdy.
Hey, I made up. What's funny is his show, Techno-Agorist, it didn't exist until I titled my episode that.
That's awesome.
But yeah, I have one question. I've heard of the Tom Woods bump. I've heard of the Colbert bump.
The Rogan bump.
Do you think there's a Maharrey bump?
I'm pretty certain there's not. Okay, so here's the funny thing. Most people like I've gone to a number of events. Most of the stuff event type stuff I've gone to is with the 10th Amendment Center, and I've gone to a lot of stuff with Michael Bolden. And basically, most people know me as, "Oh, you're that dude that works with Michael Bolden." So if you want a bump, you need to get Bolden on the show. There's your bump, because I'm just basically his second fiddle.
Oh yeah, and we'd be happy with that, but we like you better. So
well, and he's hard to get a hold of.
I'm sure he is.
He doesn't like do media, and you don't want. It's hard to get him to do anything live because he didn't want to leave LA. Like, he didn't even like to leave his neighborhood. He's the biggest homebody in the whole world. But man, if I lived in his neighborhood, I don't know that I want to leave either, because the amount and types of food that are available within like 5 blocks of his apartment are like insane. So there's another advantage to California, man, if you like to eat.
Oh yeah, I've been out there once. If you go out there again, I highly recommend going to what's it called? It's like it's not the Death Museum. It's like psychology, the Museum of Death or something. It's a Scientology front.
Oh.
And you go through, and they blame psychiatry on everything.
I know a lot about Scientology.
Oh, do you?
I do. I lived in Clearwater, Florida, which is their quote unquote spiritual headquarters. So yeah, I talk to those people all the time.
Yeah, okay. It's called Psychiatry, an Industry of Death, and it's absolutely fascinating, because you go through and they literally blame everything on psychiatry and psychotropic drugs. Like 9/11 is blamed on psychiatry.
Yeah. Do they do the e-meters at the end?
They didn't, because I think they're being a little more coy about it, and maybe they did, and I just told them no. I can't remember. It's been since 2012.
They used to in Clearwater. They would stand out and like they own most of downtown Clearwater, which was a big deal when we were living there, because it's eroded the tax base so badly. They would create all of these fronts and businesses and buy up property, and nobody knew that they were Scientology. And then all of a sudden, oh, this is a Scientology property. We're taking this off the tax rolls. But yeah, that's some bizarre creepy stuff. And I could tell you some stories. There was a church that was right next door to one of the big Scientology buildings, and they actually had a former Scientologist come in to speak. They were doing like a series on cults, and knowing that the Scientologists were, pretty hardcore about stuff like that, they really kept it hush hush on the down low that this guy was coming in. Mm-hmm. And somehow the Scientologists found out about it and were at the airport when he showed up.
Oh, wow.
And it was like the only way they could have known is if they had somebody planted on the inside, or they were using some type of monitoring or surveillance or something. It was just, that's some creepy stuff right there. If there's any Scientologists out there, I'm sorry if I'm offending you, but I'm not sorry.
We should have you on later just to talk about Scientology.
I don't know. I'm not an expert. Like I said, it's just more of what I witnessed and saw. And they would, if you go through downtown Clearwater, I'm not sure if it's like this now. It's been quite a while since I've actually lived there, but it used to be if you go down there at lunchtime, the streets were just full, and they all wore these little Navy uniforms because L. Ron Hubbard was
the Sea Org.
Yeah, I had so that's all the Sea Org people are there in Clearwater, and they're all wearing these uniforms, and they all have dead eyes. I mean, it's like it has that weird oppressive feel like I had in DC with the cops. It's like there's some kind of thing here that's just.
I went to school in Lakeland, Florida.
Oh, okay.
And so we actually went over, the last time I was in Lakeland was in probably 2012 as well, or I don't know.
But so when were you in school in Lakeland?
I was there from late 2007 to about late 2011. And then
I lived in Lakeland for 9 months in 2005.
My brother would have been there. You may have seen my brother at some point.
Lakeland's not big, or at least it wasn't.
It's not. It's also they have a lot of meth. A lot of meth there.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. Meth wasn't really a big thing 20 years ago, but they're not as big as it is now. But yeah, Lakeland, how about that?
Oh yeah. Well, Mike, I can't thank you enough for coming on and legitimizing us.
Yeah,
if
seriously.
You're depending on me to legitimize you, I'm sorry. You're welcome for my service, but I don't know. Maybe y'all need to step up your game a little bit.
Really, we're sorry that you did this.
Really? So basically what's happened is I've just dropped my status.
Yeah, huge amounts.
Oh, yeah.
It's
going to take a while to recover from this one.
You'll also notice that I dropped the retard word.
I did. I noticed that.
We try to say that at least once every sports ball episode. So
oh, yeah, man. Dude, I have... That's one of those things, like, I try not to say them in public, but there are words that I hold on to from my youth that still make me laugh.
Yeah.
Yeah, just gotta say them in private now.
Right. Or on a podcast, which isn't really private. I know that at some point, like, if people say, oh, Mike, you should run for office, which is like, no, I shouldn't.
No, I don't want to.
I wouldn't do it because I have a theory that 90% of politicians are sociopaths. And I'm not a sociopath, so I'm not qualified. But people started digging around in stuff that I've said and not so much done. I've not really done a whole lot of stuff that's really bad, but I've certainly said a lot of stuff that'd be like, I'd get unpersoned and banned from things. And
oh yeah, no, I would too. I don't really tie any of what I do to work. Like, if you go on the internet anywhere and search my name, you will not see where I work.
Yeah. Well, I had to do that for a while too when I was worked in journalism. I worked for about 5 years for a TV station here in Lexington, and I never referenced that I worked there for that very reason. Plus, I'm supposed to be an unbiased journalist. That's a whole nother. We could do an episode on journalism. That would be fun.
Oh yeah. Dude, anytime you want to come back, we're ready. This is enjoyable.
More than happy to have you.
Well, it was fun. I enjoyed it. Even though I was, like I said, I was cranky and tired. Now, of course, it's time for me to go to bed, and I haven't been able to watch any TV.
Oh, man, I am so sorry. But just think, you get to go to court tomorrow, and that'll make it all better.
Oh yeah, I do. I don't have to do anything. I'll sit there and listen to the lawyers. And every hearing that we've had, though, the city has said something. I've been like, "What the? Did he just?" So I'm sure they'll say something that's asinine and absurd. And when this is all over, things that I know that I've not made public will come out, and it'll be fun. So.
Oh yeah, definitely let us know when that happens.
Yeah, I'll just give you a hint. Sometimes government agencies aren't real smart about how they redact things.
Ooh.
And I'll give you another hint. Magic marker does not cover up type.
It's true. I know this for a fact.
Yeah, so I know more than they think that I know.
Nice.
Awesome.
It's always good to have a one-up on them.
Yep.
Oh yeah. Well, we'll let you go to sleep, and we'll tie this thing off in a knot. Is there anything you want us to tell people to look up or Google, or which podcast you're proud of?
I'll give you all my things. First thing I always tell people is if you're interested in the political activism, the pragmatic approach, this whole nullification thing, visit the 10th Amendment Center, 10thamendmentcenter.com. It was cool. We did we had a meeting a few years ago with the folks at the ACLU at the national level, and we've been working together on some privacy and surveillance stuff for a number of years. And when we were there, Glenn Greenwald's lawyer came into one of the meetings and was just hanging out, and they were asking and trying to get a feel for what our organization was. And when they realized how small it was, he said, "Boy, you guys punch above your weight," which I thought was really cool. We do a lot, and I think as far as libertarian organizations go, I'll put us up against anybody in terms of actually doing practical, effective work that is doing something to undermine the state, especially the federal level of it. I'll put us against the LP any day.
I was about to say, so you're going to say you're better than the LP? Because I agree.
Yeah. So 10thamendmentcenter.com. I have my own website, michaelmaharrey.com, which is mostly my podcast, although I have all kinds of stuff on there. And it's more oriented towards the 10th Amendment Center type work. I've got a Constitution 101. My Thoughts from a Hairy Head podcast is there. I've got some music that I produced on that website. So there's just a bunch of stuff about me, book I've written, stuff like that. So that's a visit. And then if you are a believer, or if you're not a Christian and you're just interested in kind of looking at voluntarism and anarcho-capitalism or libertarian anarchism or whatever label we want to slap on it from a Christian perspective, godarchy.org is the place. And the Godarchy podcast is there.
I can't wait till you have me on that.
We should do that. Actually, I've got a cool one. I've got two really good interviews coming up if they come together. I don't want to say who they are yet because I'm paranoid that they won't come through, but I'm excited about that podcast in that website and that whole project because it really seems to have there's a niche audience there that really is hungry for stuff from that perspective. And like I said, I really want to be an anti-war voice and Christian movement. I'd like to figure out how to broaden that and see if I could, offend a whole bunch of Christians. That would be fun. I'm on Twitter at mmaharrey10th, like the number 10th. I'm a lame Twitterer.
I'm a troll.
Yeah, I don't do much on Twitter. And then, of course, if you're interested in the economics and business cycle, Federal Reserve stuff, you can go to shiftgold.com/news, and I write two articles a day there that generally relates to that. And
2 articles a day.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm blessed to be able to write fast.
Yeah.
So it's one of the things you kind of learn in journalism school. So I write a lot. They have the little Grammarly thing, and it tells you how many words. Like at the month, they'll give you a report. My word count last month was 106,000.
Oh wow!
I was like, that's a lot of words. So yeah,
Oof.
I'm prolific. Now I'm not saying that all of that is quality, but
so you're saying you're essentially Walter Block?
Yeah, except not. Yeah, not nearly as smart. That dude is brilliant. I had lunch with him a few months ago, and it was like, yeah, this dude's way smarter than I am. So I'm just a dumb journalist. I tell people that all the time. I don't really have any original ideas. I just repackage what other people say.
Yeah, I just repackage what other people say and try to make a joke about it.
Yeah, and I think that's good. We need humor because there's a little bit of lack of that in some of our circles. Sometimes everybody's I'm so serious and
and that's our whole thing.
Actually,
that's our whole thing. Is we've said this before, but there was I won't name the name because I have harsh feelings, but there was a show that I listened to for a while that was pretty news centered, and then once I stopped listening to that, I kind of fell off for a while. And so when me and Phil were talking about this, I was like, I want to do news, but I want to do it late night style.
Yeah. And
so that's our deal. And so hopefully we eventually get more than, 50 or 60 people to listen to us. But,
well,
we'll get there.
Here's some things that I've learned. Most podcasts don't have nearly as many listeners as they want you to think.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're getting over 100 downloads, you've got a pretty successful podcast, to be honest. I mean, I think probably 90% of your podcasters aren't getting that many downloads. So if you're at 60 at this point, I think that's probably a pretty good start. That's like reading. Most books sell less than 500 copies.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, and it's interesting because if you talk about going off the rails, but this is an interesting thing to me, just the dynamics. Like if you share an article on Facebook, I've had some articles that have gotten you look at the stats on Facebook and there'll be 75 likes and 83 shares. And, you have this great reach. It reached 10,000 people or something. And then you go look at the website, how many people actually clicked that article? 45.
Wow.
All the time. People do not read things. And then what's really extra frustrating is the people that are commenting and vehemently ridiculing what you wrote when they never read it. It's like, I know you didn't read this. So I'm saying that as a way of encouragement. Like my thoughts from a hairy head, I'm in the 200s of episodes. I've been doing it I took a break for a while, but I've been doing it for 4 or 5 years. And it very rarely goes over 150 downloads.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah. Whatever.
We'll get there.
If I was trying to get rich or famous, I wouldn't be doing it in this venue.
Right. Right.
I would sell my soul and be a conservative commentator and probably could go work on Capitol Hill and make a bunch of money and screw an intern or something. I don't know. I guess that's what they do.
Ooh.
Exactly.
Yeah, but then you wouldn't be on our show, and would it really be worth it?
No, because this is fun.
Awesome.
That's about enough of this, right?
I mean, I could keep going, but it's almost bedtime.
It is. It's 2 minutes to bedtime. I haven't taken a shower yet, so.
All right. Thank you so much for coming on. I cannot. Yeah. I can't stress
thanks again, Mike. Appreciate it.
It was a pleasure. It was good.
Awesome. We hope to have you back.
I'll do it.
Awesome.
All right, and good luck to you tomorrow.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, thanks. I'll probably do a little video update when I get home. So
sounds great.
Okay, cool. We'll keep an eye out
all of
for
your
it.
social media channels that you haven't been banned from.
Or you don't hate.
Right. Yeah. Well. All right. Good night, guys.
Good night.
Good night. All right, folks. Thank you for having a bit of fun with us and joining us for this interview. A very, very special thank you to Mike Maharrey for coming on and dealing with us.
You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and Patreon at This Is MLGA. If you'd like to send us an email, you can reach us at thisismlga@gmail.com.
Hit us up, subscribe, and make sure to rate us on iTunes. It helps us grow and guarantees new episodes.
Also, don't forget to check out the MLGA Network. We're a small and scrappy group of libertarians that share all the best liberty podcasts on MLGAnetwork.com. You can find Mike's on there. Make sure to check that out. And we're still working on some new shows, so keep an eye out for those.
We're happy to be here, and we're happy you're with us. Stay sane, everybody.
I'm still here.